As Vice Chair of the SAU 21 Joint Board Policy Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12 pursuant to executive order number 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possibilities by video or other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the SAU 21 Joint Board's Policy Committee have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through this platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting through dialing the following phone number: 646-876-9923 and webinar ID 898-2488-0729, or by clicking on the following website address listed on the agenda: https://us02.eb.zoom.us/j/89824880729. The public providing public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting. We previously gave notice to the public of necessary information for accessing the meeting, including how to access the meeting using Zoom or telephonically. Instructions have also been provided on the website of the SAU 21 office at www.sau21.org, providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please call 603-926-8992, extension 103, or email revans@sau21.org. Adjourning the meeting if the public is unable to access the meeting. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. With each member states their presence, please also state if there is anyone in the room with you during the meeting, which is required with the right to know law.
Greg Parish.
Present. Family in and out.
Tom Von Jess.
Present. Marianne Von Jess in the room.
Mike Rabideau.
Present. Leslie here.
Leslie LaFond.
I'm here by myself. They're downstairs.
Sharon Gordon.
Present with family in and out.
Okay, I have the roll call taken.
Thank you. Hold on. I need to pull up the board docs now. I have too many screens. Don't want to mind, Rhonda?
No. Thanks anyway.
You sure? It'd be fun. All right. So, the agenda. Call to order. We've done that. Approval of the minutes from November 4th. Do I have a
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
I'll second that.
Great, thank you. Any discussion, changes? All right, then can we get a roll call vote?
Greg Parish.
Yes.
Tom Von Jess.
Yes.
Mike Rabideau.
Yes.
Leslie LaFond.
Yes.
And Sharon Gordon.
I'll abstain.
Great, thank you.
I have the roll call. I have the vote recorded.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Arakelian now to go through the policies that are required by law.
Thank you very much. We'll
Thank
start
you.
with EBB, school safety. So this policy is required for all schools. It was previously embedded in another policy and now is standing on its own as required by law policy. Dr. Hobbs can expand on this one as he has safety and emergency planning as part of what he does. But this is where principals are required to uphold procedures and training, in-service training, accident record keeping, plant inspection, the driver and vehicle safety, fire prevention, catastrophic planning and procedures, and relevant to students and employees. But Dr. Hobbs.
Yeah, I can jump in. What you're going to see, this is the first of 3 that are on here on safety. And this first one is kind of an affirmation statement about what we should be doing around school safety. Like Dr. Arakelian said, it talks a lot about the training that's involved for teachers, staff, and students with respect to emergency training. I got to say, it looks a lot like the one that's being withdrawn. It's just a more robust form of the ADD one that you see on the policies for withdrawal. But I'm happy to speak to any questions on what we do to adhere to it. It mirrors our practice already.
David, I have a quick question. It indicates for all the districts, with the exception of Winnicott, the policy does not exist. And this is probably a ridiculous question, but now that we will vote on this and accept it, probably I can assume that the policy does now exist.
It still needs to go through the process.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Would Leslie, would you like us to just go through, or would you like to vote on each one? How would you like to proceed?
Unless anybody has any objections to it, let's go through them all and then just vote on them unless we have an issue of something that blaringly comes up. But I think that would be the smartest thing.
Okay, sure.
But
Thank
I'm
you.
fine with that.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Greg.
So do we have any questions for Dr. Hobbs or myself on EBB?
I don't.
Okay, I'll move on to GBCD, background investigation and criminal records check. So let's see here. So this is in line with what we do currently in our SAU 21 office. We had Holly Bean, who facilitates all of our fingerprinting and background checks, look through and review this policy to ensure that we follow all of these guidelines, these requirements. So within this policy, it requires that the district have the applicants all release their background, any criminal history records as provided by the New Hampshire State Police, along with a full set of fingerprints taken according to that statute. It authorizes the state police to conduct a criminal history records check through its state and records of the FBI, and to release a report of any misdemeanors or felony convictions, as well as any charges pending for disposition for any crimes listed. So in this policy, the superintendent shall require these unless it's for accepted employees. But even so, that you'll see in one later in this policy, we still require the background checks and fingerprinting for the exceptions. So that's the bus drivers and monitors on who are on the buses sometimes when needed. So in this policy, it allows the superintendent to deny a final offer of employment until we have results from these background checks. And if there are any charges or any misdemeanors or felonies pending. And it allows us to make those decisions in the best interest of the district regardless.
Okay.
Any questions on background investigation and criminal records check?
I have one.
Sure.
For the bus drivers, the bus company for a student provides the names, the roster, and additional information. Now, who actually does the application? In other words, the applicant does, but is it the bus company that takes each employee in, or is it the school?
It's a great question. So the bus companies actually do their own fingerprinting and background checks. They're the exception. Everybody else, like contracted service providers, our own new employees, substitutes, they all go through our office and we send all of the background checks to Concord. It takes about a 2-week turnaround time, comes back to us, and then we can offer employment.
Now, do we have the bus drivers' results on our file or just on the contractor's file?
I think it's part of our contract with transportation, but that's something I could look into. I don't believe we keep personnel files of contracted services. So First Student and Durham School Services, the specialized transportation, we have contracts with them. We contract out with them. So I do not believe that we hold personnel files for their
Just a
staff.
question.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Dr. Arakelian, is there a cost to the district for these background checks?
So it costs, I think it costs $50 per every time we send it out. And for our employees, Rhonda, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe for our employees, we incur the cost. However, when we have contracted services, I know this for a fact, because with all the contracted services that we have through special education, those individuals come through our office and they cover the cost.
Okay,
I thought they covered the cost, Greg. The individuals covered the cost. I don't know why I thought that.
well, where I'm going with this is I don't see that in the policy, who's responsible for the cost. And I don't know if it needs to be in the policy or if it's elsewhere, just so that if
Section I.
we're absorbing that cost as a district, that's fine. But do we need to identify that, or is it elsewhere? I guess, yeah.
It's section I.
I do see that now.
Section I, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we actually had this conversation because in Northampton at one point, we were having a hard time getting substitutes in because they were expected to cover the cost, and the cost basically netted out to their daily stipend. So we cover the cost in Northampton for.
Okay. Thanks, Tom.
Tom,
Yes.
was that just changed, you said?
In section I,
Right, but I mean, you just changed it in Northampton?
So we had changed our prior policy in Northampton. This reflects our current.
Okay.
This isn't because of Northampton. This is
No, that's what I'm just saying, because because I remember it that they used to pay, so that makes sense that you guys changed. I like this better, so
Sure.
thanks.
absolutely.
I have a question on J. It says the superintendent is authorized to establish written protocols for background investigations. Do we already have protocols in place for that? Like I'm looking at verification of academic records and achievements. Like, is there depending on who you hire, is there already a protocol in place for what you specifically look at?
Yes. Written protocols for background, which protocols? So the protocols for our SAU are consistent across positions, as far as the background checks and fingerprinting. And then, yes, so in the hiring process, academic records and achievement for professionals, we have those protocols through human resources in the hiring process.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Other questions on this policy, GBCD?
I'm good.
One piece of clarification, there's a separate policy for volunteers, correct? So this is just for employees?
Yes,
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Caroline and Rhonda.
absolutely.
I have a quick question.
Oh, go ahead.
Maybe I just need clarification. So maybe this isn't the time, and maybe this is. So it's all the superintendent, but hiring
Guys,
has to be
come up and
approved
eat.
by the school board, correct?
Guys.
Yeah? What?
Oh, I think Sharon was.
Oh, sorry. I'm yelling at my kid. I was on mute. I'm like, come up and eat.
So Leslie, I'll share my my view and conversation. The superintendent is going to forward candidates to the boards for hiring, and they will never bring somebody to us if they haven't completed the background check ahead of time. So we're assured to get a clean candidate with the endorsement of the superintendent when they're forwarded to us.
Right, but the bottom line is it's the board that approves a hire, not the superintendent or the SAU, correct? Like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to, like, I just need to wrap my head around it, because I know in the past it seemed very clear to me, and in the last couple of years, it seemed a little bit not as clear, a little cloudy, where it was, somebody was offered the job and then it was brought to the board, and I'm like, well, you've offered the person the job. I know they were supposedly subject to board approval, but I guess I'm just looking at semantics here, like,
I'm just
nobody
curious.
gets offered a job until they go in front of the board, correct?
I think it's also the position, because like administrative staff, like somebody in my position, those don't go to the board.
Right, but I mean, faculty, staff, that kind of stuff
That's
do,
right.
correct?
So yes,
Okay.
school board has approval, but I think the process, and to that point, that's why there needs to be a kind of a waiver for the summer. Sometimes the boards allow the superintendent or, to hire for a month or two,
Right.
a certain amount of time in July and August when the board's not in session. So
Mhm.
that's to that point. But as far as, the preparation prior to bringing someone to the board, I think some of the process that we cover at the SAU is we want to make sure that what we're offering is even something within, what they deem acceptable.
Mhm.
So we wouldn't bring someone to the board who, hasn't at least seen a contract. They're not going to sign anything, but if a contract is, unacceptable to them, we wouldn't want to bring someone to you and then the next day find out, oh, they don't, this isn't anything what they expected. And it, so we do review that with them.
Okay. Is it a specific or is it a range, Caroline?
For
Like for salary, like contracts, do you give them the actual contract, or is it?
It would be so for a teacher, it would be the step,
Okay.
what step and years experience.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
And that kind of stuff, that's published anyway. So, it's really just guiding the person to say, oh, okay, this is this district step. You have this many years experience, you'd fall here.
Okay.
Unless they're a non union, they're an administrative.
Okay. All righty. Thanks.
Sure. Any other questions about GBCD before I move on?
Nope.
Okay. So this one's a fun one. I'll cover this one. JCA, change of class or school assignment, best interest and manifest. It used to be manifest educational hardship, manifest hardship. So I have some notes here on this one. So New Hampshire, the RSA 193.3 recognizes that there are some instances when a class or a school where a student might be assigned because they live in a certain district may not be in that student's best interest. Or other factors might exist under which that creates a manifest educational hardship, so that student would need a reassignment to a different class or school. So this policy outlines the process for a parent to pursue that. So the first step is best interest. So if the parent wants to inform the superintendent that they believe their school, it's usually school, not class, usually a class change is handled at the school level. The parent would write a letter to the superintendent, and the superintendent needs to schedule a meeting within 10 days. The parent at that time would describe to the superintendent the reasons and the request to move within a school or to a different district. Superintendent needs to respond to the parent within 5 days, the decision. So these are about our students moving out, not accepting students in this part of the policy. If there's a disagreement, there can be a hearing and the parent can bring it to the board. At this level, if the superintendent does deem that it is a student's best interest to go to a different school, transportation is not provided to that school, but tuition is determined by the SAU and provided, obviously. So if it gets to the point where there's a disagreement, the parent can then take it to the next level of manifest educational hardship. This is when a student has a documented hardship in his or her educational placement, in that hardship has a detrimental or negative impact, has to be on the student's academic achievement or growth, physical safety, or social emotional well-being. It needs to be severe, pervasive, and so persistent that it interferes with the ability of the student to receive an education. And then there's a whole process for that. Within 30 days of that disagreement, the parent then writes to the superintendent, and there's a process for that. And it involves the board at a later time also. So I have dealt with a manifest educational hardship on a couple occasions, and it follows this process pretty closely, because first a family needs to work with their own district to say, this is not in my child's best interest to go to this school. It's usually because of some contentious issues that have happened. And so then that family goes to their superintendent, their board, and then if that superintendent and board agree, then they start looking for other schools to approach. And then the process starts at the other school. So I've worked on both ends of that in the past 5 years.
One quick point of clarification. The referring school is responsible for both the tuition and the transportation. Is that correct?
Transportation only in manifest educational hardship. So only in that second level. It's not if it's just a best interest.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Dr. Arakelian, the time frame for which the parent guardian can contest the superintendent's decision seems to be quite lengthy. 30 days after receipt, and then another 15 days. Is that normal? Is that a normal length of time, or is that a legal length of time?
I think that is to allow the parents to seek legal counsel.
Okay.
That's usually
because that could that student potentially be out of class for 45 days if they're that uncomfortable?
Very possible.
Wow. Okay.
It could be the case that the sending district provides some kind of home instruction, and this is before any kind of COVID situation. If a student is home, they can be home for lots of other reasons too. If a student is home, you can provide tutoring, you can provide other supports in the home so the student can still be involved in their classes while they're in between schools, so to speak.
You say can, but should it be we have to, as under the kind of every student, no students left behind?
That would be more accurate, yes.
Okay.
However, when there's an issue, so if this student is saying, I don't want to go to this school anymore, I just think it's probably unlikely that that student is still engaged in their classes, but you're absolutely right in that we should, we're required to provide an education to all our kids. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions about this one?
No.
Okay, thank you. Concussions and head injuries. JLCJ. So there are a couple new pieces to this. And I will start out by saying the nurses reviewed this.
Okay.
I sent this straight to the nurses. This is in line with what we're already doing. It includes definition of a head injury. It's our duty to report. There's a graduated reentry plan. It needs to be compliant with the NHIAA procedures and policies, and we need to provide training for staff and coaches and provide information for parents. And that's a piece of the new piece, policy and plan.
So I have a question on these with, and I guess it's just a throw it out there. The concussions, this only is only good for ones that happen at school or during school, correct? I mean, unfortunately, we have, kids in other leagues and whatnot, and we have to rely on their honesty that if they have a concussion there, the protocol still stands here, correct?
Well, certainly, and we would be asking for their doctor's recommendations. So if a student had an injury outside of school, whether it's concussion or otherwise, we would be, and we would want the student to go to the doctor regardless, whether it's at school or not. So if it happened outside of school, we would be looking for that doctor's note and instructions. But yes, as far as reentry, we would still be following the reentry.
Yeah, and that just scares me sometimes that it's, things happen outside of school. We don't hear about it.
I know.
You know what I mean? And now we've got a kid playing that shouldn't be playing and those kind of things. I suppose there's no way to rectify that. We just have to
True.
keep our ears open, I guess, but all right.
It does have in the policy in section 3, after a student has suffered a concussion, whether in school or not.
Okay.
I have a question. Does the SAU have an athletic director, or is it the nurse like at Barnard?
Well, it's per school. So we don't have a centralized lead nurse or doctor at this time. But we have an athletic director at the high school. 2 nurses across our districts.
Okay, so that athletic director would put together that concussion and head injury information sheet and that stuff. Okay.
That's right.
And then that would get disseminated throughout all the districts.
And they have, at the high school, obviously, that's the largest athletic program. They do a whole athletic, I forget what he calls it, but like protocols and rules meeting, and parents and the athletes must attend or they can't play. So they take it very seriously.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Lizzie, I have a procedural question, if I may.
Sure.
Do you want a motion to approve policies required by law section, or did you want to do all of them at once? Doesn't matter to me. I just wanted to know what your preference is.
My preference is to go with the ones that were by law, this is the last one of those, right?
Yep. So I'd like to make a motion to approve the 4 policies required by law: EBB, GBCD, JCA, and JLCJ, to forward each to the school boards for a first read.
I second that.
Any discussion? All right, can we have a roll call then, please?
You're on mute, Rhonda.
Thank you. I'm I'm like, I'm here. Greg Parish,
Yes.
Tom Von Jess,
Yes.
Mike Rabideau,
Yes.
Leslie LaFond,
Yes.
and Sharon Gordon.
Yes.
I think we should all learn sign language and then we can just be doing this through the whole meeting. And then A, we have to be paying attention, and B, we don't have to worry about mute.
Yeah.
You
can
think
do
it makes it difficult for the recording later that we have to put out there available to people?
Oh, that's right. Wait, you'll have to learn Braille. All right, you want to go on to the next set?
Sure.
Thanks.
EB, Workplace Safety Program and Joint Loss Management Committee. After reviewing with Mr. Ferreira, let's see, I believe this is a new, there are a few reasons why this is a new policy. And we have some of these pieces in place. They're called different things. We have safety committees at different districts, facilities committees. So this new policy was an overlap with EBB school safety, and it's asking that we create a joint loss management committee. So that's something we would create when this policy is adopted.
And that would take the place of those other committees you said?
Yes. Any questions about this policy?
I think we're good.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, crisis prevention and emergency response.
Be back on.
Yes, Dr. Hobbs will speak to this policy.
Okay, these two kind of come as a package deal, really. We've got EBCA and EBCB. EBCA refers to the emergency response plans that we have to create and submit to the DOE on a yearly basis. And it outlines kind of the particulars about what that needs to entail, which includes the FEMA emergency management structure. That's something that's currently within our practice. It's something that we've been submitting on a yearly basis, and I have the scars to prove it. And one thing I'll note is with respect to the site-based plans, we do have that covered according to the law, but it's something that as soon as things settle down with COVID, it's something we want to take a hard look at in terms of ease of use, because the current plan we have now is like 108 pages. And it's not something you want to flip through during a crisis. But we're meeting the letter of the law on that one. I can just go to the next one.
Sure.
Okay.
Anyone has questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, Dave, I have a quick question. Do we have 100 and something pages? Do we have a cheat sheet that's out there for responders that has a quick reference?
Yeah, thank you for that, Mike. That's something I've been publishing the last 2 years. I've had this position, and it's basically a 3-page phone numbers, evacuation types, and structure for emergency response.
Great, so we've got it. Super.
David, I have a question. Is this tied into the group that met a few times with the Hampton schools and the police chiefs, the fire chiefs? Is this all wrapped into that as part of the discussion and formation of these plans?
It is. It's actually tied into this particular policy that we should have a working relationship with emergency personnel, and obviously the superintendent or his or her designee manages that, and that's something we intend on continuing as soon as, again, we can meet in person.
Those were great meetings, by the way. So I just wanted to share that with everyone. Very informative, scary, but informative.
They were great. I agree.
Anything else for EBCA?
No.
Okay, so the next one, EBCB, is it's short and it's just reflective of that new RSA that came out. I guess it was the year before last, and that's actually, Greg, to your question, that's what we continually referred to, Rich Kane and I, in our presentations at those meetings, where they changed the drill types and drill requirements. So this one really deals with the drills that we have to conduct on a yearly basis. And it moved us from 10 fire drills into basically 10 total drills, 4 of which have to be, what do they call it? All hazard drills. And 1 of which can be a talk through, an armed assailant talk through. But those are our requirements now. Obviously, you know, we can adhere to this without, you know, creating undue stress on students. A lot of the ones that we're talking about that are a little bit more all hazard drills are more talk throughs, table talks, those kind of things. And they completely meet our requirement in terms of the law.
David, should that be spelled out that they're talk through ones where it doesn't have it in here? Because it says that at least 4 such drills shall be all hazard response drills. Should that be changed so that it can be a talk through, walk through? Just curious.
Well, it continues that says
Never mind.
those must be a test.
Got it.
An armed assailant drill may be discussion based. So I think we're okay.
Okay. Yep. Sorry, I didn't continue reading. I just get to that armed assailant thing and freak. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And again, this is just, it's actually the law catching up, or the policy catching up with our practice.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody have any questions for Dave? Good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. EBCG, communicable and infectious diseases. This is likely the longest policy we have for you here today. This replaces some identical policies you can see in the admin content. The board adopts this policy as a means to minimize risk and respond to these health concerns while respecting the rights of all students and employees, including those who are so infected. So you can see here, this helps us make decisions for students, employees, on how to minimize exposure and keep confidentiality.
When would we ever use this? I'm just kidding.
Why don't we ever use this?
I said, when would we ever use it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No
Yeah,
idea.
Relevant, really? Who needs?
Because we all sit in our own private space.
I
Yeah.
know.
I feel like we're gonna all walk around with a bubble soon. You know, like George
Well,
Jetson.
Bubble boy.
Yeah, bubble boy.
So,
Exactly.
like,
Exactly.
exposed without a mask on, you know?
Oh,
Oh,
this is so weird. Yeah, without one.
Rest assured, the nurses have been through this with a fine tooth comb.
Yeah.
We've also sent this to the NHSBA attorney. And so first we brought it to the nurses. They had some comments and suggestions and questions. We brought the nurses' comments and questions to the attorney. He okayed all of their, except for one, which they understood. So he okayed most of their tiny edits, and the edits were really, really administrative edits. So we bring to you what the nurses have vetted, and the attorney has vetted the nurses' edits. So I feel good about that.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? on it?
And my only other question would be, in addition to the nurses and the lawyer, have the unions had a chance to take a look at this, because employees are affected here as well?
I have not sent it to them, but that is something that we could make sure that they have access to this and give us any input.
I just want to make sure that it's, and I don't have any doubts that it is, but that it's aligned in an agreement with the CBA and nothing of no concern or conflicting. So my initial recommendation, although Leslie, I will certainly follow your lead, is to table this one until we have C and CESPA's input.
I would agree with that. And I'd like to take it a step further that, where do we stand if the employee, i.e. a teacher, refuses to participate for whatever reason? And I might just be repeating what Tom said, but that's kind of how I see that. They have that right, and where do we stand?
So really, and I think that's a great idea. But what I will add is that this is exactly what we're doing now, as far as when we feel that an employee has been exposed or they tell us that they have a positive test result, we're excluding them. So in decisions regarding employees on page 4, how it says, determinations regarding exclusion shall be made by the superintendent or designee, and so on and so on. So this is what we're doing now. But that said, I think it's a great idea to bring this to the unions.
Yeah, and I don't want to make sure that I'm clear, Caroline, I'm not opposed to this. I'm not pushing back in any way. They're a party of this, and I want to make sure that they're on board.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the nurses actually brought that up too, in saying, okay, we're the nurses for the students. They're not medical staff for their peers unless there's an emergency. We've had several conversations about that, particularly during COVID-19, in that, people have questions, people go to them as a resource, but it's not their license. It's not their purview. It's out of their responsibility. They can't be offering medical advice to staff when they don't have a background on staff. For students, we collect that information. We have emergency cards. We get it from the parents. We have immunization records from doctors for kids. We don't have any of that for staff. So you can imagine a nurse could really get in trouble for saying, overstepping there. So they were very careful about that, and they're also part of the union.
Well, my question too, though, is, I agree with what you've said, and I think it's great that, to have the union look at it, but as far as whether it lines up with their, with the contract, would the attorney have noted anything that was not copacetic?
Probably in general. He was not referring to our CBA or our MOA, but in general.
Okay. Oh, that's right, because it was the school board one that you went to, right? Not our attorney. Okay, got it.
That's right.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. If you guys want to table this and, and send it to the,
I think it's a great idea. Caroline, also, are there specific training outlined for the staff that's required under this? In other words, would we attach a list of whatever they're required to go for training on?
Let's see, I believe it's in this one at the end. There are also bloodborne pathogens. I believe that's in another policy in required trainings.
How about the COVID one? It's new.
I'd have to look into that.
Yeah, it's really very specific with the COVID as opposed to a lot of the others. So maybe we should have that conversation with the unions also, as long as we're leaving this open and tabling for now.
We can do that. I'm just scrolling up to the top. I know that communicable and infectious diseases are listed.
Right, but it's not very specific because we have such a different process that we're following for this particular one. But I'd like to make sure we have that very specific, that they can pull it out and say, okay, just like Dave was saying about the safety thing, here it is, here's a cheat sheet on what you should be doing, because it might happen a year or two from now and it won't be fresh in our minds.
I'll never forget any of this.
I don't think any of us will. It's kind of stamped right there. All right.
I think that's a good point, Mike. Absolutely. We can do that.
All right, so we'll table that one.
Yes, please.
Okie dokie. So the
Any-
next one,
Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome, thank you.
GBCE, this is, speaking of training,
Mm,
this is very straightforward. This is a new policy which was passed into law in July 2020. Reflects that law, training either online or in person concerning child sexual abuse prevention, sexual assault and harassment, policy training, warning signs, reporting mandates. Needs to be completed within 30 days of employment and renewed every 2 years for all employees, designated volunteers, and others.
So this comes back to that volunteer, like your volunteers at the school.
Mhm.
Are they all criminal? Do we say that in the beginning? Do they get
You know,
criminal?
this one,
Because this one just says any designated volunteer whose position requires a criminal history. Is there anybody that should be in any of our schools that doesn't have a criminal background check?
I don't know anyone who would be. Volunteers need to have background check.
Right. Yeah.
This is training.
How about oh, that's just for training though, right?
This is just for training. So my question is, how do we track this? So because there's two parts to this, right? It's within 30 days, I need to have the training and it needs to be documented somewhere that I get received the training. Is it done online and I'm signing something electronically and that's kept on file? Am I signing a piece of paper and handing it to someone saying that I've received the materials for the training? And then on the renewal of every 2 years, how is that done? Because I want to make sure we're not rubber stamping a policy that we don't have the operational machine to track and implement.
Thank you. Yes. So this would be added to the list that we are required by law for our employees to complete. And I think Aaron and Lauren can contest to this as far as the list of trainings that we require at the beginning of every year. In particular, the newest one is the suicide policy, suicide training, 90 minutes per year for employees. So what we do is we have an onboarding process, and that's through HR, where employees, no matter when they're hired, beginning of the year, middle of the year, volunteers, they need to have certain trainings, and that's part of the hiring process.
Yep. So I get that for employees, right? So it's part of the HR process. Bang, I got my training, I signed up, and then I'm in a 2-year or each year rotation. That's great. But for volunteers, so I'm new to town, I volunteer to chaperone my kids' field trip. I'm going to get my query checked and my fingerprints. I'm going to be okay to do it. Do we have a process in place in all of our districts to make sure that I get the training and I sign off on that?
That's out of the SAU. So yes, when they get their fingerprinting, even volunteers. So when volunteers come through and get their fingerprinting and background check, they have to do trainings as well. I can
We should double check on that.
provide the process if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think we should double check on that only. And again, I'm not pushing back on this. And thankfully, it's not required by law. I'm not having been close to it through my through PAL in Northampton. I believe that there may be other ways for volunteers to get their background checks done. That's not through the SAU, but gets forwarded to the SAU. And again, if we need to have sign off that they've had training, and we're putting a policy in force saying that they've had training, I want to make sure that we have the infrastructure to do that. I'm not certain we do right now. Okay. I'm sure we do for employees. You told me how that happens, and that's great.
Yeah, we can definitely look into that. That's important.
Can I ask a question too? Maybe.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Sorry, who's Greg? Did you have something though? Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Leslie.
a quick question. So we do a background check, a criminal background check when somebody gets hired. How often do we do one? Is it one and done?
It's one and done because then they're in the system.
That needs to, okay, so but what happens if something happens outside and now they have done something and we don't know about it? So in other words, I guess to me, we should be doing it more often than one and done. Because unless it hits the paper, how do you know if somebody's been,
Well, I think that's the point of having their fingerprints on file. Right? So then if they are charged with a misdemeanor or a felony, we would be notified.
you get notified because you have their fingerprints?
Yes, there are employees. We have a list of, so the DOE puts out a list of any educator who's had who's had any charges or felonies or been discharged from a position. That's something that's sent to districts every year.
But not volunteers, right? So I guess that goes back to Tom's thing too. It's like, so I'm volunteering to, help with the field hockey program. I'm a volunteer on the field, right? I'm there for 4 years because my kid's there for 4 years. I'm even there afterwards without my kid. I've done my fingerprint. I've done it once. I've done my I keep my trainings up, but that's not part of the DOE.
Right.
So should it be done to for volunteers? I guess more is what I'm saying. I guess I'm just.
I can get you that. I want to ask that information. I want to ask about that and get that.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, it's tricky too, because Leslie, I'm totally with you on the one hand. On the other hand, you don't want to make it so onerous that people say, heck, I'm not going to volunteer because I have to jump through all these hoops, right?
Yeah, right. Yep.
And I'm not putting, like I said, it's tricky.
It is.
It is, but I guess and maybe because I'm, we're preaching to the choir here, it's like, I jump through hoops if I have, I've got nothing to hide and I want to volunteer. I don't care if I have to go get fingerprinted every year to have it, to make sure that the kids are safe on the sidelines or in the classrooms or whatnot. Do you know what I mean? I think the ones that might have issues with it should have issues with it. So I don't know. If you could just check for us, Caroline, and get back to us on that one and just see. I guess I err on the side. I get it, Tom, and I do understand because a lot of
in some cases, working parents too that can't get to the SAU with the narrow window of the 1 day a week, the hour that they're available.
Yeah.
And so I get it.
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't need to be fingerprinted multiple times, right? Just the background check.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
One fingerprint.
Yeah, because if they shave off their fingerprints every year, we don't want them.
Right.
Yeah, I don't want them. Yeah, good point.
That seems
All right, thanks, Caroline.
Caroline, what I don't see here is language, and maybe it doesn't belong here, language that indicates that if they don't get this training, that the district has, I guess, the authority to not allow them to volunteer or participate. Do we need that language? If so, where?
Would it be covered, Greg, by saying shall require? It kind of gives it to that, or should you want it?
Yeah, that could be it. Yeah, that might be it. The only problem there I see is where it indicates and or is a covered employee as defined by board policy, but that doesn't cover volunteers.
Yeah.
Designated volunteers, right?
So this policy relates to GBCD, which is a policy that you guys already have in place. And if you take a look at GBCD, which is out there, which is the background investigation and criminal records check, it does have a thing that talks about designated volunteers. It's on page 2. And right below that, I just had it. Of course, It talks about where did it go?
Refusal to provide the required.
Refusal to provide the required criminal history records release form and any other required releases to authorize a background check will result in immediate disqualification and no further consideration for the position.
Okay,
So that's, I
I'm
mean,
fine.
the policy
Yeah.
you're looking at right now is attached to this other policy.
Okay.
You know, this is where the policies start intertwining with one
Sure.
another. It might not have the wording because it's actually referring to a bigger policy and it's a supplemental piece
Okay,
to
I'm
that.
fine with that. Thank you.
So we're
Rhonda-
going to advance GBCE, but we just may have some additional conversations around it. Is that correct? All right. Leslie, can I make a motion?
Okay, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Rhonda, does it say in there, what does it define designated volunteer? I'm just thinking, you know, there's been times I've gone into the classroom for like a holiday party or, you know, like a one-shot thing.
Yes.
And I've done the fingerprinting, but do I
Right.
now need to do this training as well, right?
So,
It's defined in another policy.
right, well, it has volunteers here and it says designated volunteers are subject to a background investigation, criminal records check, and the provisions of this policy, GBCD. Designated volunteers are defined and so designated pursuant to policy IJOC, which is the volunteer policy. So this is where it's like,
Yeah.
here it is, and then you got to go over here to get the other piece, and then you got to come over here to get the other piece. And so that's how they're all, to make it in one encompassing policy, it would be
Yeah.
20 pages. So, and my understanding is when the legislature makes a change, they'll make a change to a specific area, and that's why they'll create a policy that just covers that small piece of it.
Sharon, that's exactly
You know, instead of
That's
having,
exactly the point I was making, which is that I'm certain that we're not tracking this for the volunteers, but we're putting a policy in place that requires us to. And that may be onerous for our administrations. I don't even know if we can exclude the required for designated volunteers from this.
So the other piece with GBCE, being that it is a recommended policy and it's not the priority required, we're a little more leeway in editing some of that information. So, you know, if you guys decide that you want it to say, you know, to take out the piece for designated volunteers, you can. Is my understanding.
Okay.
I think, you know, to Sharon's point, we would want to review that definition first, because perhaps by saying designated, it provides you that leeway. Whereas I can tell you that, you know, the suicide policy, there is no leeway in any shape or form. Every person, food service, custodian, bus drivers, they all have to do that suicide policy. That's very different than this.
So Caroline, do you want a chance to double check on this before we approve it? So maybe we table the communicable and infectious disease and GBCE for
That's up to
tonight?
you. So that's up to you. That second one is just about the training.
Yeah, but we don't have, the current language is recommending that we put a policy into place that we cannot administer. So we either need to, in my opinion, change the language or confirm that we can administer this policy. Otherwise, we're putting ourselves and our districts at risk.
That makes sense. So in my research on the volunteer onboarding process, I'll determine if we can even implement that at all.
And maybe we asked, can we take the language of that it's required for designated volunteer, that this training is required for designated volunteers?
Right. Yep. I'm happy to do that.
So
So-
Leslie, may I make a motion then?
Mhm.
Absolutely.
I'd like to make a motion to move EB, EBCA, and EBCB forward to each board for a first read.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Okay, roll call.
Greg Parish,
Yes.
Tom Von Jess,
Yes.
Mike Rabideau,
Yes.
Leslie LaFawn,
Yes.
and Sharon Gordon.
Yes.
Okay, I have that vote recorded.
Thank you. So now we're on policies for withdrawal.
And these are the ones the previous policies will replace.
Okay. Do we need to go through those or can we just withdraw them?
There's one policy you won't want to withdraw, and that is the JLCC, because until you adopt EBCJ, you don't want to withdraw JLCC because that's the only thing you have right now covering that particular information.
Good job, Rhonda.
Right. We don't want to do that.
I try.
Got it. So it's okay to withdraw ADD and JEC
And JLI.
and JLI.
Mhm.
Isn't there a song that does these things with all the, okay.
Called the alphabet song.
Yeah. Oh, good God.
You're on
Okay.
fire.
Do you want a motion on that?
Yeah, somebody else do it, please.
I'd like to make the motion to withdraw policies ADD, JEC, and JLI.
There we go. Second.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Mike. Any discussion? All righty, roll call.
All right, I'm catching up to you. So that was Mike and Greg. And
Yes.
so Greg Parish,
Yes.
Tom Von Jess,
Yes.
Mike Rabideau,
Yes?
Leslie LaFawn,
Yes.
and Sharon Gordon.
Yes.
All right, I have those votes recorded.
Thank you. All right. Oh, wow.
Motion to adjourn.
Go.
Wait, can I just ask, did I miss something? Because you all voted on the other policies. Did you vote in the first four that were required by law? Did I miss that?
Yep.
Yeah.
You got those too? Okay, I didn't hear them all. I thought you
Up
missed
the
those.
stairs.
Yeah, they did that first.
You just want to stay longer.
I
That's
really
it.
don't, but I don't want you to
I
have to come
actually
back.
somehow missed it too, Aaron, so don't feel.
What's that?
I actually missed it too, so even though.
Okay, thank you. And I don't even vote, so.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Stay
Thank you
safe,
very much.
stay healthy. Did anybody second the adjournment?
I did.
Great.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Not really, but,
Yeah,
All
but
right, you did now.
All
right, I
right.
did now.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Stay
Thank you,
safe.
everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.